Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Thunderstruck. My name is Michael Wax here with Jake Ricker. Jake, we have a very, very special guest with us today. He is a writer for the Sun Times. He is currently working on a hockey culture book for Triumph Books, which is coming out in the fall of 2021. Mr. Evan F. Moore, how are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. All right.
Yeah. So first question, just to, get things going. I was reading through your bio on your website, and I found something pretty interesting where you said that you were a bouncer for 10 years and you only had one injury, and it was a swollen pinky. Is there some sort of like backstory behind that, or are you just like fortunate that, there's this one thing that you can just talk about?
Oh, well, I just remember I was throwing someone out and a tussle happened, and somehow in the heat of the moment and adrenaline's pumping and everything else, my finger got like slammed in the door, and I didn't realize it until after. And I'm just like, one of those things where you like, what the, like, oh, like, like that type of thing, and so, yeah, I always tell people like, like it's a tough gig, and like, you go through a lot of stuff, and just to have that one injury is pretty amazing. And you can probably see, if you can see it from here with my other pinky, one is a lot bigger than the other. So yeah, so that's kind of what that was. So yeah.
I think that proves to me that you're a tough guy and you're definitely somebody that you don't want to mess with, right? Just that one injury, you knew what you were doing.
Yeah, I mean, there's very definitions of tough, but I guess being my size and have people seeing me fight or whatever, it's like the same thing. So we're talking about hockey. It's like, like there was times when someone like a Val James who was injured, who couldn't play, but the fact that he was sitting on the bench was enough to, police the entire game. So, so I guess it was something like that.
Yeah. So moving on to your book. So you and Jashvina Shah at Ice Hockey Stick on Twitter are in the process of writing a book about hockey culture, and whereas you've seen a lot of the books that have been published have been talking about the pros, you guys are digging a little bit deeper, and you want to sort of talk about some things that we need to improve on. Uh, is this book going to be featuring instances that have already happened that you're going to dig deeper on, or are they going to talk about possibly things that we have never before heard of?
Oh, well, it's a combination of a lot of things. I mean, I just want to preface this by saying that I think hockey is the greatest sport ever, and the Stanley Cup is the greatest trophy in team sports. And I love the sport because when I first saw it as a young kid on TV on the south side of Chicago, and I just thought from day one, I thought it was like fun and dangerous and unpredictable and exciting all at once, which the sport is. And we just kind of want to preface that because people think if we're talking about stuff that's hockey culture or hockey at all, like they think like, we hate the sport and we're trying to change it for the worst or anything like that. If you love something, you want it to be better. I view it as, I don't know, like intervention or having to talk to a loved one about, problematic behavior. You love them and everything else, but, at the same time, you're going to be like, hey, cut the shit. And so, yeah, me and Jasvina, because we had been separately jotting down things for a book or a long essay or something like that. I remember tweeting like, hey, who's going to pay me to write a hockey book? And I reached out and was like, hey, I was thinking about doing the same thing. How about, we collab on this? And she was with it. And I guess in terms of, to answer your question more directly, in terms of things that that we're going to discuss are going to be blurs on racism, homophobia, xenophobia, ableism, and how hockey media at large, just contributes to a lot of the problems, and how, yeah, we're going to talk about specific incidents. And the thing about that is we know certain incidents that happen, but I think it's some of those need a deep dive or to look into the impetus of specific behaviors and why that's connected to, to hockey. I mean, is there other problems in other sports? Yes, but I'm writing a book about hockey, and I'll worry about the other sports later, right? So, and we've since we talked to a lot of people about it. We talked to people, we talked to parents, we talked to players, we talked to coaches, we talked to scouts, we talked to people who covered game for a long time, fans, observers, anyone who has any interest in the sport. And we talk about really a lot of a tough thing. Won't be there'll be some things in the book that'll make you laugh, some things that'll make you cry, some things you probably didn't know, some things that, may frankly, piss you off. And this won't be a comfortable book by any means. We want it to be for people to learn something. Maybe you see stuff online or hear anything else and you're like, oh, here we go with this shit again or whatever. But we lay things in detail. And, there's instances, like I said, instances where things that happen, and we want to get into why that is, where that kind of behavior come from. We're going to get into the weeds. And thankfully that Triumph kind of saw our vision, and we had a bunch of conversations with them about how we see this book and how we want it to be. And they thankfully, they were with it.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think you summed that up beautifully too, talking about how, you talk about this stuff too, because you love the sport and you really do want to see it succeed, talking about how Stanley Cup really is the greatest trophy in sport. But yeah, really cool. One question I do have for you though, as well, is so with the book, you kind of talked about what you're going to talk about, but what is your ultimate goal with this? Is your goal just to shed light on it so other people can understand it? Or is your goal to maybe offer up some solutions and what people could do to potentially change things?
Yeah, it's gonna be a part of it. Whereas we have a section where we're just like, because some people love to say, okay, well, what about solutions or whatever, and they don't want to discuss, what got us here. And we're gonna kind of include all those things. Yeah, we're gonna talk about some things where, like I said, we're gonna say, oh, this happened, and maybe this how it should have been handled, or everything else. And like, as for instance, when when both teams, both bubbles were, happening in Toronto and Edmonton, and you saw folks from other sports is kind of mobilized. You saw it with the WNBA, you saw it with the NBA, you saw it with Major League Baseball, you saw it with with the Premier Soccer League and other leagues across the country. And the last sport to drag their feet on this, was historically and predictably, NHL. And I think one of the third things they offered up was like a moment of silence, and you're just like, really? Like what's? I mean, it's one thing to say, like, well, because the sport has had the demographic it has, that it's easy to say like, well, it's a bunch of white guys, and I'm not really expecting anyone to be abolitionist John Brown or anything like that. But at the same time, that's a lot of the NHL operates in cities where, where social unrest has been a problem for decades. So you can't, sit there and be like, well, I had no idea. Like, all you gotta do is like, pull your head out, and you'll see what's going on in the world. And when I have these conversations, people are like, well, great, diversity is great, yay. But when we start getting into the weeds, it's like, what? Like it's just it's a deeper issue. And I think things are changing somewhat, like just to see, like guys like Jonathan Taves and Taylor Seguin and Zdeno Chara and Blake Wheeler, like connecting the dots. Whereas in the past, you only had maybe like PK Subban or a couple other players like speaking out on this stuff, but PK did it, in a way where it was like, not to ruffle feathers and everything else. But this is the thing where you're gonna have to, be uncomfortable and think about certain things that you may not have to, worry about or think about before.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And sort of moving from the the book aspect of it, we heard during the bubble, I think, or maybe it was after the bubble, that the Hockey Diverse Alliance, the HDA, filled with a couple minority players, they are not going to partner with the NHL. Like, is that like, does that uh, shine negatively on the NHL, which I presume it does? And then, what is the next best steps for each side to take?
Well, it's historically when diversity initiatives to happen, whether it's journalism, education, corporate America, corporate Canada, or wherever, it's going to be a group within that feels like something is being forced on them, right? And they're going to push back because of that. And it's taken. The NHL, the diversity initiatives go back to 1995, right? And like something that they have on paper, but they knew this is a problem. It's like this. It isn't like these issues popped up like last year or earlier this year. It's kind of think about that. What happened with George Floyd? That was in Minnesota, state of hockey, right? So they like to call itself that, and all, and it's in hockey within hockey culture within Minnesota is within itself its own entity and brand. So I would say that like the HDA separating themselves from the league is probably the best thing. It's like we do a lot of lip service. We do they see what happened with hockey, what's happening with Hockey is for Everyone, and it basically turned into a victory slogan. Is it really for everyone? We've seen these events and different things that's happened, over time. Remember what happened here in Chicago with the Caps and the Blackhawks with Devontae Smith-Pelly, but fans were chanting basketball repeatedly at him while he was in the penalty box. And anyone that knows anything about hockey culture, when you say that to a black player, you're basically saying, the N-word. And remember, that happened in February during Black History Month, during Hockey is for Everyone, when the NHL rolled out all the stuff they do with that. So it all starts, after your other question, it kind of starts with listening, like listening to people. Like, you can accomplish so much by listening. Like it's like, your significant other wants to sit you down and tell you something. You probably listen to that, right? I hope you do. But it's, and like, do you like come up with all these ideas and everything else and try to do all these mental gymnastics when you're brought with this? And it's kind of the same thing where it's like, and people have been telling the league for decades how it operates and how it protects players and other folks who've done some pretty, awful, things over the years. And hockey definitely benefits from, being a niche sport. In the States at least, and how things are covered. If certain players that did certain things and there were other sports leagues, we would have heard, all about it.
Yeah, very true. I think we're all looking forward to your book as well. It's going to be nice to, talking about this, you got to listen. So, and that's probably the first step you could take, is even just, reading your book. So excited to see what you guys come up with and what you guys start talking about as well. But I want to talk about too, the Chicago Blackhawks as well. I think they're a very interesting team. I know you covered them for a little while, a couple years back. I want to talk about Chicago Blackhawks now, though. I think the Blackhawks are in a very interesting position as it is. They've kind of sent out a letter to their fans talking about that they are looking to rebuild. What are your thoughts on the Blackhawks right now?
Well, just being in town with two other teams who pretty much said like, hey, with the baseball team, with the Cubs and the White Sox, who did a full, true rebuild where, they traded away star players or players with value and got back draft picks and invested in their minor league system or farm system. So for the Blackhawks to put out that letter, but still have Seabrook's massive contract, have Kane, Taves, and Keith had those core for those Stanley Cups, and if they're gonna do a true rebuild, those players have to find other places to skate too. So I don't know how you rebuild on the fly with aging players, aging core, but it's great to have obviously Kubalik and Kirby Doc but they also let go of the most unsung player they have in Corey Crawford, which probably should where Patrick Kane should probably take his Conn Smythe over to his house. I mean, let's be honest, like in that playoff, in that Stanley Cup final, like about what Crawford means to the team and the wins that they had this year. I mean, they did a lot better than a lot of people locally thought they would, but even in some of those games with the Vegas Golden Knights, I mean, Corey Crawford made some really great, saves, and that's a player that you think you should want to keep around, right? I mean, they really sold Delia, Subban, and a couple other players they have at that position. I mean, we'll see. I mean, but they also gave themselves cover by saying, like, hey, this might be a tough year. It might be a couple lean years ahead. So we'll see what happens because the team was really bad for a long time. And, between 2008, 2009 up until now, I mean, they're the fruits of what happens when you win. You find new fans, you invigorate the franchise, and you remember like way back when, and I remember the ESPN magazine poll, they were voted like the worst ran sports franchise. So to come from that to being where they're at now and being in every other Winter Classic and everything else and doing all these things. Maybe hopefully they actually win a Winter Classic one day, but but yeah, it's their brand and they have probably the best American-born player they ever seen in Patrick Kane and a bunch of other solid young players. So this kind of remains to be seen, but to kind of answer your question more directly, I mean, a lot of people were pretty hot at Bowman for doing this, and you kind of seen them going on, different podcasts across the city that's kind of trying to, demo support for what they're doing. But, I mean, we've seen a couple other teams in town do the same thing, and it's working out for them. So I have to give it the benefit of the doubt, but at the same time, a lot of folks here always say, well, he only had those Stanley Cups from players that his predecessor Dale Talon brought in, but he was able to, keep that going and kind of fix the standard, what do you call that? The not Stanley Cup, but salary cap to fix all that stuff and to keep it going. But yeah, it's gonna be pretty tough here for a couple of years. It seems like.
So you mentioned Stan Bowman, and I just have a question as like someone that's like followed the Blackhawks, or like you followed the Blackhawks for a long time. What is it with Stan Bowman trying to recoup former players for the team? Because I think of like Brendan Saad and Andrew Shaw, like these are players that like left and then immediately he wanted them back like a couple of years later. Is that a sense of like we're falling off a little bit, I want to get these guys back so that they can perform optimally and we can get back to the promised land? Or is that a job saving thing where he's like trying to save face, like, hey, I'm bringing back like Brendan Saad?
All right, I mean, when they traded him to Colorado, I mean, it was like, well, you should have got more. You should have gotten more back, and hockey media and fans and bloggers were of the opinion that the Blackhawks got fleeced on that deal, and I mean, those players they won Stanley Cup, so it's a good feeling when you hear their names. But at the same time, the reason they brought him back, brought Saad back was because he was really great on the line with Taves. But it's just interesting how they, just keep bringing these guys back out and it's not working. And obviously Saad hasn't been the same player, since he, came back since they brought him back from Columbus. So, and then you have Shaw, who was pretty much ended this year. I mean, I think that's someone that's gotten better over time because he was a guy for a long time that took a lot of dumb penalties, and you're like, well, that doesn't really fly in today's NHL. And he kind of did something similar to what Ryan Reeves did, where he was kind of known as like a guy who's surfing, a physical player and banger or whatever, and he started to develop a pretty decent offensive game, and you just kind of saw that at the Blackhawks, where now he was a guy who traditionally played like a fourth line. He was on the fourth, and that series he was on the first line, and kind of just going around and his physical presence, that kind of helped Vegas overtake that series. And you really think about it, like Blackhawks, even when the Blackhawks were winning, they were never known as like a physical team, and sometimes teams tried that type of game, and sometimes it worked, but most of the time they were able to skate around it, because when you had the puck as much as they've had over the years, you score a lot of goals, so that was never something that was was like a glaring issue. But just to keep bringing back players that recreds and everything else, I mean, they need to spend more time, kind of cultivating players. And sometimes you see some of these guys go on to other places and do pretty well. And as someone who, as fans and other folks, are kind of wondering, like, what's this guy doing, right? So that's why it was such a nasty reaction to the quote unquote rebuild and what he got back, what Bowman got back in the side trade.
Speaking of all those finals, I think we should quickly talk about too the 2015 Stanley Cup final, obviously with the Chicago Blackhawks and the Tampa Bay Lightning. Obviously a little more hurtful for Lightning fans, as it did not end the way we wanted it. But I think that was a really good finals that we had in 2015. There was a lot of interesting stuff that went down. Obviously, the Lightning dealt with a lot of injuries, but that was, right in the middle of the Blackhawks dynasty, so to speak, when they were, a really, really good hockey team. Do you have a favorite memory from that 2015 Stanley Cup final, maybe?
From I guess the moment for me didn't really happen, on the ice. It was more so like when media were kind of going around town, like interviewing folks. You might have saw this for like someone that interviewed this one guy who was happy walking down the street, and they walked up to him. And it was a man on the street interview, and he was like, the Blackhawks are so good, they got black people loving hockey. And I thought that was pretty funny, because it's there aren't. I mean, I guess in town, really, it's when a team is really good, all these people, no matter what their background is, always come out and support it, because it kind of is connected to civic pride and everything else. But at the same time, it's like we've last maybe 10 years we've seen them be a competent team and winning some games and some Stanley Cups in the meantime. So I think it's everything's good when a fan base is something they feel like that the team and everything else represents everyone in the city. Because Chicago's a diverse city, but also segregated at times. So it was pretty cool to see people like enjoy the sport, no matter their background or anything else. So that's kind of was more so my memory was not necessarily stuff that happened on the ice. It was more so like just seeing the city back the team and be behind the team, because like I said earlier, they were so bad for so long.
Yeah, I didn't watch that Stanley Cup Finals. I was actually overseas. I'm kind of glad I didn't, because we ended up losing. But really happy for the city of Chicago. I think we saw it with this year in Tampa. It was a little more controlled because of what's going on in the world with COVID. but that really brought people together in the city, and I think that's awesome in a place like Chicago, and this year in a place like Tampa, and then you see it in other sports like LA that won 2 titles this year. So a really, really cool experience. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Moore, or Evan. Again, I apologize for
Okay.
doing that again. But everybody, do not be or don't be afraid to go and check out his upcoming book with Jasvina Shaw, which is currently untitled. Will be in bookstores fall of 2021 with Triumph Books. Again, check out Evan at Evan F. Moore on Twitter. Really, really positive insight when it comes to sports, politics, culture, all of these things. I actually found you out during the writing competition earlier this year for the
The
for the
big scribble.
yes.
Oh
Big
yeah,
Scribble.
okay, cool.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
You were a contributor on a couple of my pieces. So, but again, thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully the Blackhawks do well this year. I know you said that it might not happen, but hopefully they outperform and that they are a dynasty once again.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks guys. Appreciate it.
No problem.
Thank
Thank you.
And don't be afraid to like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and follow us on Twitter at @Bay_Bolts for news and notes. For Michael Wax and Jake Ricker, thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you very soon. And the 2020 Stanley Cup champion Tampa Bay Lightning still have moves to make, so keep an eye out for that.
That's the truth. Go Bolts.